Well, hi everybody. Welcome to My Agreements with Me for Believers. We are in week 20, and this is Assuming and Storywriting. My name is Sylvia Castillo.
I'm Desiree Duran.
And I'm Bob Newhart. Just kidding. I'm Ray Tom.
You're so funny. We come together to have these conversations from the workbook, My Agreements with Me, and they're just so rich and powerful, and we're so glad that you're joining us. And one of the things that we always do before we start our lesson is to begin with prayer. So we'll go ahead and we'll start there. I would just invite you also to just take a deep cleansing breath. And if you want to even release with a sigh, sometimes we don't do that enough. We're in our head and not in our heart. So take a deep breath and let it out. Oh, dear Heavenly Father, I'm so grateful to be here right now having these conversations. So grateful for Des and Ray and for all of you listening as we talk about assuming and story writing. Father, I ask that you would just keep guiding us and giving us your wisdom to open up this container and space for healing to happen as it relates to assuming and story writing. I pray that you would just continue to give us your word, lead us where we need to go, teach us to keep an open heart and an open mind, and that it's all about healing, that we're here to love and to shine your light and to be your hands and feet. And the more that we do that, and as we stay grounded in your word, we can know where we're operating from and we can continue to do your work. And I'm just so grateful for this truth and this knowingness and this book and this work, and for those who are listening whose lives are being transformed by doing your work and following your mighty word. So it's in your holy name that I pray. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So we're talking about assuming and story writing. We open up in this lesson. It's with the verses here: judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. That's one of the verses that we have. And don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know that God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Romans 12:2.
Ooh, and he that answereth a matter before he heareth, it is folly and shame unto him.
So what does that mean to you, reading that?
So if something is happening and it's kind of like, okay, to me, like say gossip, right? Say somebody is gossiping about somebody else. And if you're hearing about it before you're hearing about it from the person who actually it's pertaining to, then it's folly and shame into you. So it's like listening to secondhand, to me, it's listening to secondhand gossip. It's saying if you're answering a matter before you hear it, so if you're hearing it from one person, but you're not hearing it from the source, and you're going ahead and answering and listening to it from that person who is speaking it, but not the person that it came from, then it's folly and shame unto you, because you're not going to the source, right? You're not hearing it from that person.
Right.
It's hearsay, it's gossip. And so that's what that means to me.
I love it, because it's kind of the point of the whole lesson, or one of the points of the whole lesson, is that instead of, we can hear something and we can write all these stories about what it means, and oftentimes when that happens, we never go to the source. We never attempt to go right into the thorn or the challenge or the problem and seek to understand and have dialogue with that person or with whatever that issue is. And then there's all kinds of stuff that happens in between with story writing and assuming. And
it reminds me of that game that we used to play, telephone. Did you all ever play that in middle school? And so one person will say something, but by the time it gets to the last person, none of that was even said. It's like so jumbled and so messed up that I feel like that's what this also is pertaining to. Like you're not listening to understand, you're just listening, and then you're putting your spin. And so everybody has a different spin. So by the time you get to the end of the last person, that story is blown up and it's far beyond the truth.
And that's scientific. So basically, that's where perception comes in, because what happens is, out of the 200 million bits that are coming out, people delete, distort, and generalize 125 of those bits. So what we take in may not be what Sylvia takes in, what Desiree takes in, and we see something totally different. Ever see where two people witness the same event but come away with a different perspective, right? So this is why it's so important to trust and verify. Ironically, we can probably admit, all of us on the call right now can realize that when we came to our parents and say, hey, Johnny wants me to spend the night at his house. Oh, are his parents okay with it? Yeah, they're okay with it. Okay, well, let's call the parents, right? The key was to trust and verify, that actually is what took place. Because what happens is, a lot of times we make assumptions, right? Stories, and we create what we want to believe is true. I know this for me is definitely true. So that's where trust and verify came in. It's just a softer way of saying, I trust you. However, I just need to go ahead and actually verify that, and that's really probably the biggest elixir of, kind of like dissolving gossip and all those other things, because, it's just, hey, I trust you. I just need to verify that, right? It's just one thing that, worked for my mother.
For all mothers, I think.
Right.
Oh my Lord.
In the workbook, under the why section, and I'm going to plug again shamelessly for the workbook, because if you're listening to these conversations and you don't have the workbook or the exercises, you're getting half of this. And with all of the resources we have for you, you're just going to get so much more if you're actually following along and are able to do this. But I'm reading from the workbook, and it says in that first section of the why, it says, when we assume, we take on a prideful posture of knowing without knowledge, which is foolish. Like, that one sentence has so much depth in it. Taking on a prideful posture, thinking that you know when you really don't know, not having all of the facts, not having all of the knowledge. And then how does that make me foolish and assume? And then I can keep assuming in story writing. And then not only that, then we can go 2 steps further, and it goes to me sharing. Now I'm into rumors and gossip. Now I'm into like turning this into something that completely different, and just it'll get out of control very quickly without reeling it back in and, standing in the truth and getting to the truth of whatever's going on.
And I love even, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I love even the line before that, where it says, the reason, so why is assuming in story writing significantly dangerous? The reason why it is dangerous to assume or story write is you do not have all the facts. Therefore, you are inaccurate, presumptuous, and without the facts. The danger is when we assume, we make ourselves right in our own eyes. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the hearts. To do justice and judgment is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. And a proud heart and the plowing of the wicked is sin. And I love that, because that's so true. We look at things through our own eyes and we magnify it and we blow it up by, one, the story we're telling, but also those emotional hurts and pains and things that we already feel about ourselves. So story writing then adds what somebody has said or done and heightens what we already feel about ourselves. And that's how everything gets really out of hand and out of control. But then we began to, like you said, Sylvia, begin to tell the story, right? Or we get allies to justify how we feel. And then you have all these things happening where it's creating this big tornado, all because of inaccurate information, assuming, storytelling, story writing. I just think that's so powerful. And God does look at our hearts.
So let's talk about maybe some of the things that we can assume. And I'm going to read from the book again, because I think that once we can talk about that, it might sound familiar to somebody listening. So, different scenarios, and then maybe we can get on to how to address those things, because I think that'll be a very important part of this conversation as well. So it says here, it says, let's assume your friend didn't sit with you and study, whether that's a Bible study or just communicating or whatever, like she usually does. She must be upset with you. So you avoid her at your weekly meetings. Or another friend is invited to several parties and you aren't obviously, let's see, sorry. Another friend has invited you to several parties and you aren't, the two of you are drifting apart, so you don't reach out anymore, or your sister hasn't responded to your text and phone messages. She may have found another friend whom to confide in, so you stop calling her. Like, I think we've all done that, right? Something happens, we make an assumption, and our assumption drives our action, which is to disengage or to create space because we've made up this story that it's negative, obviously. And so I'm not going to be friends with that person anymore. I'm not going to talk to them. And it's all made up. Right. So then we were talking about this earlier before we jumped on. So then if that happens and you're there, how do you even address that? Because it's all false. Most of it, we don't have all the facts.
Yeah. One thing I want to say before we actually look to answer that, if that's all right.
Sure.
Is that, so this kind of verse came to mind. We don't have it in here. However, I'd love to add it, is 2 Corinthians 10, 4-6. And what that talks about is, what we're talking about is imagination, because in imagination, you create things, right? So it's not true, but you create what you want this through your imagination. And so in 2 Corinthians, it talks about, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, right? But mighty through through God to the pulling down of strongholds. Strongholds are the way we think. So below the line thinking, above the line thinking. It says casting down imaginations at every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So when we create our imagination, we've got to be very careful, because what's happening is we're then creating stuff that is, if it's below the line thinking, because it's not true, then all of a sudden those can create strongholds, right? Those resentment moments, those bitterness moments, those jealousy moments, all the things that we're creating without actually having any facts. And that's why God said again, actually, take captive every thought, so that we don't sit there and actually go into those particular creating strongholds,
I love that.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that up.
So then what? So, so then what did you do?
Yeah.
So what do you do when you're story writing and assuming? Because I love how we always put assume makes an ass out of you and me, and that is so true. And that is in the book. And we do mean donkey.
Yeah. And how many of us have felt that way, because it has happened. I mean, let's put it this way. I was a big Facebook, red light runner, meaning like I sat there and actually would read a post and be like, oh my gosh, like, and I would respond. And of course, then that's when Snopes and everybody else was like, fact check, So ironically, I'm realizing like, wow, I just absolutely jumped on that train and didn't even realize that it wasn't true. Right. And so, because it's easy to do, because we can assume and make that story, So yeah, I think
it says, so what are the 3 greatest questions to ask? Mm-hmm. And this could be a preface in asking these to see if you are story writing and assuming. Do I believe the best before assuming the worst? Mm-hmm. And that's key, because if you have a friend and they didn't invite you somewhere, you want to go straight to, am I believing the best before the worst? It's okay that they have other friends. It's okay that they go and enjoy their lives without you. I think a lot of the assuming goes deeper than just, it's all within you. Like, how are you feeling about yourself? Where's your confidence level? Where's your value level? But we do that often. Well, no, I actually don't do that often. I'm not going to lie. I try to assume the best before the worst, but sometimes I'm like, well, this is what it is. But 2, do I know all the facts, and have I given the person of situation the benefit of the doubt? Mm-hmm. 3rd is, do I look at the log in my own eye before I look at the splinter in my brother's eye? Yeah. And that one's huge. I think what I would have loved to add is, am I going to the source before assuming?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's important. And we all spoke about that prior to jumping on this. Is it is so important to go straight to the source. And throughout these chapters that we've already visited, we've mentioned that quite a few times, and we have spoken about it quite a few times, where that 24-hour rule is so important.
Yeah.
And also going straight to the source, going straight to the person who is maybe making, or is the reason why you're feeling a certain way, or the reason why you're assuming. Clear it up so that you don't have all of this brokenness, because the point of this wonderful work is to mend those broken pieces within you, and then to grow into the best version that God created you to become and to be in this life. And so it takes us to put away ego. It takes us to set aside pride. It takes us to set aside fear, because sometimes it can be a little fearful. We can get fearful to be rejected if we reach out to somebody and say, hey, this is how I was feeling. Is this truth? Is this not truth? It's very easy to have those, you know, those, I guess, that value system that we have, or that way we look at ourselves, or programs that have happened within our lives show up in those moments. And it's just, I don't know. I think brokenness in relationships is probably the most difficult thing to deal with or handle in this life, because
I think a lot of it leads in with assuming and making stories. You know, I can say this from just myself. You know, I literally don't communicate, meaning that I don't ask questions I ought to ask, and I don't sit there and fill in blanks that I ought to fill in. So what happens is when I do that, then it leaves room for interpretation, right? So this is very important, you know, and I can say this specifically for gentlemen, for guys, right? For us, because like for me, I just assume I know what's being said. I just assume I know what you mean. And a lot of times what happens is most communicators don't realize that when they communicate, it might not be clear, right? And so for me, I learned to get and actually, by practice, which I had to do, was start to repeat back what I heard. And then if I didn't hear it from the source, then I realized that I probably need to go ahead and actually go find out from them what they had meant, you know, or what they said, because it just oftentimes I fill in the blanks and start to assume, and that's really bad, you know, because it goes back to your telephone persona, right? Because it's just passed on, and through that, you know, things start to get and actually get watered down or change, you know, so it's not good, you know.
and I think we've all done that. I mean, I have done it absolutely, where you're right, you don't ask the right questions, you don't, the communication piece, you're not really getting down to the root of what the issue is, because sometimes you go into it with hurt, with you know, you're already hurt because of the assuming, or so guards automatically go up, right? If I think that you and Sylvia are having private meetings without me, that's going to pull something, because I'm like, my mind will go like, well, we're a team and why are we doing this? And but I have to stop, because you two have, this is just an example, but you two have a relationship separate from me, you know, just like I have relationships with you both separate from each other. And so instead of being, oh, well, they're doing this behind my back, that's programming within me that needs to be fixed. Those are broken areas in my life that need to be, I need to address and make right. What I should be doing is celebrating that you two are, you know, doing whatever you're doing, and you guys are making things better, or whatever it is you're doing. Like, we should learn to and get into that habit of being happy for other people and celebrating other people, because really, you guys, you know, I would want, like, I love you both enough to want you to have a strong bond and a strong relationship for projects or whatever it is. You know what I mean? I don't know.
And I think it's very important to be able to talk about these things. Like, say, for instance, if, say, you were thinking that way, feeling that way, or offended, I think the best part about everything is to get and actually express how you feel. And I think a lot of times what we don't, and that's the story writing, right? Because we're not allowing ourselves to find out, hey, by the way, what I'm thinking or feeling, is this actually accurate? You know, and so that's where, believe it or not, the adversary wants to take a foothold, because we don't share what we're thinking or feeling. Because remember, first of all, feelings, okay, are very dangerous, because what happens, your emotion goes down, or, you know, intelligence goes down, emotions go up. And so how can you really get to the facts if you really are in your emotions? And so this is why it's important to express those emotions, get emotions out, so that you can clear the emotions, so that you can actually think straight and determine whether the above or below the line thinking. Because typically when we're in emotions like that, a lot of times it's not going to be above the line. You know, hey, you know, Sylvia and Ray are getting together. That's so amazing. I'm excited for those guys, and I'm thinking, like, you know what, like, no, okay, typically it's not going to be that way. Our emotions are going to get and actually usually be the ones that are going to, you know, draw us down into the actual below the line thinking.
That's why I
So
love this work so much. You know, it's because it's all about healing. I had written some things down in here, with just to speak to that point about assuming or being left out. So for me personally, I can take this idea of being excluded or not feeling included all the way back to my childhood. There was a specific incident that happened in high school, and then there was an incident that happened when I was about maybe 7 or whatever grade that is. And so because those two things were big and large and powerful events in my life. And so I felt completely excluded, that I didn't belong. And I made up stories about not being good enough, not being worthy. And so I think as we do this work and we notice those things about ourselves, then we can go, oh, like, there I am again in 2nd grade or high school, having those feelings again about not being included. And I'm making up this story about what it means for these people to be leaving me out, because it's been following me my whole life.
Yeah.
So good. Oh my gosh, that is so
Programs.
good. And that's so truth. So much truth in that.
Yeah.
So back to that, like, I also feel like, so with you and Sylvia, back to the example, like, I know that I can come to you and express my feelings because you're a safe space for me. I know that whatever I tell you, however I feel, whatever's happening, you guys are, because you love me back, you're going to be open and be able to explain and kind of push that. So what would some advice be to maybe people who are listening that are feeling a certain way, but don't feel that safe space to address those issues? How would you give them advice to address the assuming and the story writing to people who may not be particularly safe for them?
Well, I think that, well, number one, I don't know that I would go to someone looking for them to, if they weren't a safe space. Like, we're a safe space. You want to, and that's why it's so important to do your work, because sometimes that safe space might be you and God and the truth, and whatever that looks like to find your safe space. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I can tell you a real quick way that actually works, and I kind of do this in my coaching. Because here's what happens. One, you want to be able to make sure your small circle obviously is very trustworthy, right? I mean, so when you're talking about that, you're looking at friends, family, you know, people, associates that are around you that you trust. So if you were to text 5 or 10 of your friends and ask them to tell them 10 things you're good at and 10 things you're not, that you can improve on, okay, you'll find out really quickly who actually is in that circle of feeling that they can come to you and tell you that. Because the people that are willing and able to tell you the truth are the people that are actually, no kidding, safe for you. So I have a client who I had do that. He got one person to respond back about what he could improve on. Because see, he never provided a space for them to feel safe enough to talk about him. One, because he never was vulnerable. So he wasn't vulnerable, opening up to them. And they never felt that they had the ability to be able to come to him and tell him honestly what they were feeling. So if you want a real quick test to get and actually find out in your small circle, text 5 or 10 or whatever that is for you, those people, and tell them, hey, tell me 5 things I'm really good at, and then tell me, you know, things that I could really improve on. And you'll find out real quickly who actually is open to feedback and who's really kind of like, you know, comfortable enough to be able to do that. And have those conversations.
I don't know if I was maybe thinking into it when you were just asking the question earlier. Like when I first started getting into my growth journey, I didn't have people. I mean, even the people that were in my circle, I might be asking those questions to, and they, because of where I was and at the time in my life, they weren't going to be able to answer those questions. And so if that is you, if you're listening to these conversations, maybe you don't have a safe space, or maybe you don't feel like you have somewhere to reach out. I just want to offer that any one of us three could be a safe space. And, we have our Facebook group, and we have private messaging or anything like that, where, if you're feeling like I feel heavy, my world feels heavy, I'm not sure how to get through this, I could use some guidance and direction, I would just encourage you to even plug into one of us, because maybe you don't have that inner circle, or you don't know what that looks like inside of your own circle.
That's a
And
good
that
point.
is good too. Very good point.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so let's talk about some good stuff. Oh, go ahead, Ray.
I was going to say, definitely never do this work alone, right? Or never, and that's the other part, like we said, the disciples went out 2 by 2, no, it's just find somebody that you can trust, and reach out. And like she said, we're definitely here. So you said, talk about something that actually,
So what do we talk? So how can you avoid assuming and story writing? So we have a challenge in the book, and it goes along the lines of to think, reason, and understand. That's the challenge. Through Christ, we have a mind that is well balanced and considers things in context. Our sound mind is stronger than our feelings, but we must give our thoughts time to catch up with our emotions. A good way to do this is to pause and think clearly about the conclusions we've made. When an assumption rears its ugly head, simply take a moment to ask if this assumption is consistent with your friends or family members' normal behavior. If it isn't, this would be a good time to ask a few more questions. Is my friend okay? Have I done anything to hurt her or him? How can I pray for her or him? Do I believe the best before assuming the worst? Repeat the pause until the assumption passes. The result, positive relationships. Man, that is so true, because we internalize, like Ray said, we internalize the emotions, and we somehow become these selfish beings where we turn it back to us instead of stepping out of the box and being like, I wonder if they're okay. The behavior is different. Something, maybe happening with them that they're not comfortable with sharing or whatever. And so that's really, really good.
Yeah.
And then what if you just didn't assume or story write? What would happen then? Do you all want to take that?
Yeah. I think the pause is really huge, because it's allowing you to allow the emotion to dissipate, because a lot of times the reason why we go into storytelling is because we're emotionally triggered for something, and we want to go ahead and actually act on that emotion. When, and I'll give the example. So Abraham Lincoln is well known for being very emotional, going through a really tough time in our country. And he obviously had a lot of people who agreed and disagreed with him during that civil, during that time of our country. So he would write a letter, and he would, instead of send it, he would just put it in a drawer to send it tomorrow. Okay. So these things, allowing to take a pause, breathe, like Sylvia asked us to breathe before we started, was to go and actually get in touch and get grounded with, with ourselves, to realize that we need to be grounded. Okay. Because what happens is we don't want to be casting imaginations. We don't want to be casting assumptions, because none of it is going to go and actually produce fruit. So when we can ground ourselves and actually sit with that, then what happens is we realize, well, yeah, okay, no, I guess I don't need to send that letter. Okay. Or, hey, I probably should talk to that person, or, hey, maybe I'm maybe making up stories in my mind, or an assumption. And so I know that I use this pause app, that's, on through the apps. And every once in a while, this thing will just pop up and allow me to stop for a second and pause. And what I have found is that it's ironic that it seems that every time that I pause, I realize I was doing something I probably didn't want to be doing. I mean, nothing bad, just meaning that I was doing something not from what I wanted to do for the day. And so it allowed me to regroup and get back. So it's just as simple as being able to really take and get a hold or ahead of that emotion, the emotions.
Very good. I like
Awesome.
that.
How many of you have voices in your head? You know, where are
Oh.
those? What are those saying? You
We're
know,
women. We have so many.
well, I think twice as many as we do. I was going to say this. So just, you know, stereotyping, you know, why is it that women are better gossipers?
Because we speak twice as much as men. I don't know.
Well, because I mean, typically what happens is it's left, right brain stuff. Okay. So you can work in both brains. However, for the most part, you're in the creative side, which means that you can create all these stories and all this stuff. Whereas, you know, for most men, we're just very logical minded, right? So we want to solve things. So guess what? We're looking for X. Okay. We're looking for X, meaning like you don't even care about the equation sometimes. You know, you're just basically like, okay, I don't need that equation. I've got it figured out. Right. And so, you know, if we were to go and actually look for the equation, meaning that in order to solve what we think that we need to solve, we need to get all the facts to understand what Y is. You know, we need to go and actually be able to go A, B, you know, so the equation actually puts the formula for the answer, which means that I need X means, oh, I need to talk to Sally because she's X, you know, or I'm going to make the assumption that X equals whatever, and it's not true.
So what you're saying is women are better at assuming and story writing than men.
Just because they choose not to use the actual equation.
Like scientifically. We're not your words, just scientifically proven.
Well, sure, because what happens is in emotion, you don't need the formula. In logic, you need the formula, right? In order to solve the problem, which means that a lot of times assuming means that I'm just looking to solve something that I want to know or that I don't know, right? And so it's just kind of a weird, quirky way to realize that don't assume without the equation that you know what the problem is or how to solve it.
Listen, I don't disagree with you because I don't know many men who assume and story write.
We ain't got time for that. We ain't got time for that.
I know, versus women. I feel like we have too much time for this.
Yeah, and I don't know if I would put it on time as much as men are singularly focused, where women multitask. So we have the ability to create all those stories where men are just like, bing, you know.
Yep.
That's
and a lot more connections, and you definitely have a lot more connective tissue to kind of work through. So, and a lot more going on. So I think it's just basically, again, getting the emotions to draw down and realize, let the emotions dissipate. And then clear thinking starts to happen. And then just being aware of where your thinking is below or above the line. I think that's huge, you know?
Yeah.
One thing that always fascinated me with men is like, I remember, you know, as a kid, like boys would have beef with one another. They would like get in a scuffle and then they'd be done and they'd be like bros again, like no big deal. Women can't do that. They're holding on for grudges for years. And then sometimes I was like, maybe we just need to fight, get it over with, and just be bros again. Like, men just always fascinated me with how they handle stuff.
Yeah, just because
very healthy, actually. I don't know about fighting, but you know.
Oh yeah, we're used to confrontation where we literally go to the person. Sometimes it's not going to them with the right intentions though. So the key is that's a whole nother different emotion, right? So
yeah, but the fact that you can do all that, which is inflicting pain on one another, and then get up and like, you want to go have a beer or let's go play. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, what? That was, I don't know. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's silly, but at the same time, you know, it takes away all the assumptions. And whatever happens that comes out of it, you realize that it wasn't worth it. And so I think if there's a metaphor for that is that, yeah, men might do that directly. However, it's because they want to get past it sooner. So when we linger and allow this stuff to linger, that's why 24-hour rule is huge, because that is essentially doing what you're talking about. It's going to that person directly and getting that squared away. You know, so it doesn't have to be a physical metaphor or a physical entity. It's basically saying, look, I'm going to confront this, you know, because it's not worth it. You know, we don't need to have rifts, because negative energy, all it does is basically distracts you from your vision. It just takes you off course. It allows you to go ahead and actually just, again, you know, spend so much unnecessary energy. And so that's the part where our bodies are being broken down and people are wondering why, like, this 30-year-old lady looks like she's 50, you know, and it's like, because you allow all this stuff to good and actually continually break you down because you're not confronting it. You're not actually, you're creating these stories in your head that are eating away at your body because you're emotionally drained and drawn. So we came out of the 3 R's, right? The last lesson, and it was about resistance, resentment, and revenge. All those 3 things are because we're creating these stories and this assumption, and then we're allowing to fester. And then resistance, we're resisting the truth. I can tell you this for me, I absolutely hate, strong word, I actually really have a disparaging time going to people and having hard conversations or conversations that I don't want to have. So I then create this story in my mind that it's going to look a certain way, it's going to be a certain way. And then when I finally do it, it's like, so I'll give you an example really quick. So I was supposed to have this week is the last week for Kristen before she goes back to work. And so she wanted to have time together. And so I had 2 meetings, and one was basically in person at lunch. And she was like, well, is there a possibility that you could Zoom that? And I'm like, no, there's no way. And so I was not willing to go to this guy and say, hey, look, instead of meeting for lunch, would you be willing to Zoom? And so I just felt like I was putting him out if I was to ask that. And so to her, it was clear, like, just ask. How will you know if you don't ask? And I'm creating all these stories in my head. And it literally took so much energy that I was so tired, but I finally asked. And the guy's like, yeah, sounds great. Love to do that. And it's like, and then how I felt after was like, man, I spent all that energy thinking this story that this guy's going to go and actually, just hate me because I dare ask him to alter his plan, And so anyway, so I definitely know what it's like to create stories and that don't serve, So I love this food for thought. It says, assuming reveals more about what's in our hearts than it does about the other person. So,
which is all the work, right? It's you figuring out you.
Yeah. And that's like what I was getting to with the texting people is it wasn't really about just the one person. You're also going to help them figure out why they're not able to give feedback, truthfully. And, so it's having those conversations, and being able to have safe spaces and places, because think about it. Do you think the adversary wants us to feel safe and secure, especially women? No. He wants you to be troubled, and he wants you to be worried, and he wants you to be in doubt, and he wants you to have all these negative thinking. So safety and security, is often what the number 2 values for most women, because they just, that's how you're made, to be able to feel that. And so the adversary knows that. So he's going to allow you to get caught up in these lies, such as this gossip and all this storytelling, because the fact is that he's going to want to make sure that the nurturer, the person who's actually going to bring calm and peace, is not calm and peace. And so the only way to get that is to get and actually take care of that stuff and then confront it right away. So, and that's why it's funny because, as a man, oftentimes, we don't really think about providing that space, and yet when we do, it's such a beautiful formula, that works out, so feminine energy, masculine energy. When a man can actually be in masculine energy, but allow his partner or it could be his mom, could be his sister, giving them that space to feel safe and secure, allows them to be in their feminine energy, and they don't have to. So when a female or a woman has to protect themselves, they go into masculine energy. They have to feel as if they have to provide their own safety and their own security. So, I don't know if that makes sense or if I'm wrong.
It makes perfect sense, or we should do a part 2 on that, because I feel like, especially with the amount of broken homes that we have, there's so many women having to operate from a masculine energy just to do what they need to do for their single households. It made perfect sense, and there's so much to that. So, yeah.
It was like revelation and aha moments all throughout that. I think we need to write a book about male, female.
Well, it's an interesting time because archetype basically is that, all involved of our persona, the mask that we wear, the actual, no kidding, energies that we share as far as masculine and feminine, because we all have it all. Okay. We just don't realize that we have an apparatus of modis, meaning that we operate from one that we are most comfortable with. And the other one is just necessary, so you don't really want that one unless it's actually necessary. Problem is when we're operating in that, in the common, then that's a lot of energy. Because here's the deal. Most men, if they're operating in their feminine energy, are going to be very tired. They're going to find that they're in resistance to their normal state. And then when women are working in their masculine energy, then they're going to find that they're going to be in very tired, very in resistance, because a lot of this stuff is just it's not natural. It's necessary because they're in survival mode, but it's not natural.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
So yeah, so in the storytelling stuff, I mean, trust me, if you want to go into your 3 R's and you want to go and actually be dangerously cousins with the adversary, then allow those stories to be created, allow those stories to happen. So if you're on this call, hopefully you'll really take one thing away, was to go and actually realize that 24-hour rule, make sure to get and actually connect, cast down imaginations, take hold of your thoughts, keep above the line thinking, and do not allow yourself to go and actually become the mockingbird that all of a sudden believes a story or creates a story that doesn't have facts of the formula so that you know how to solve,
Yeah, great way to wrap it up. The awesome conversation. So we look forward to talking with you in the next lesson. All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.